Okay. So, let me tell you about my first exposure and first experience to D&D, or Dungeons and Dragons. Okay. So, my first exposure to D&D was actually when I can't remember if I found the books or if she gave them to me, but my mother's old D&D books came into my possession roughly when I started high school. And it was actually Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 2nd edition. So back when the game, one of the younger versions of the game, the more experienced and veteran players will remember this. It's called FACO, or more as officially known, 2-hit armor class 0, which is kind of like 5th edition's armor class, but reverse. You want FACO to be as low as possible.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, you know how you have an attack roll in 5th edition? You have an attack roll, and then there's a bunch of stats that subtract the attack roll so that you can try and match the FACO. It was very weird and overly complicated, like most things in old Dungeons and Dragons. But yeah, so the first things that I received was actually the player's handbook for AD&D 2E, as well as her original set of dice, that were these lime green colors with blue and red speckles on them, and as some pre-printed character sheets, or pre-made ones, that were actually these like colorful, nice A5 laminated sheets with stats and pictures of the characters on. Yes, I know, old school D&D was fancy at some point. And I think she also gave me her old character, which was this human witch type character. So she could create potions and put hexes and curses on people and cast minor charm spells. And she also gave me her version of the monster manual. Now, when I say her version, I mean she found a monster manual from somebody, and she photocopied all of the pages and put it in her own little binder. So yeah, she used to play Dungeons and Dragons with her brothers and friends, and so eventually, now that she was all grown up and she was out of that phase, she passed all that stuff on to me. And I pretty much I went from reading books to only reading the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons rulebook. That was the only book I read for a few years, and I read it over and over and over again. Now, there's a reason why it's called Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 2nd edition. It's because the rules are very mechanic and technical, and even though I read the book back to front, front to back, cover to cover, I still didn't really 100% understand the rules. And to give you an idea of how hardcore it was, other than FACO, of course, all of the races had a stat improvement and a stat reduction. And all of the races had at least, but usually more than one, positive ability and at least one negative ability. The only exception to this were humans, because they had no significant ability other than the ability to specialize in anything or become anything, representing their unlimited potential. And it was so interesting that even that certain races could only be certain classes. So I think, for instance, dwarves were less likely to be certain types of mages, and elves couldn't be something like a barbarian, for instance. I don't think there was a barbarian back in 2nd edition. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, to give you an idea of class restrictions. So eventually I grew confident enough to a point where I decided, okay, I am old enough and I've read through this book enough to try and get an idea of how it works. I'm going to try and run a game for my 3 younger brothers. And you obviously know the age gap between me and my brothers.
Yeah.
So they were still very, very young, and I tried to make it as easy for them as possible, but it's still very clunky, unfortunately.
It was.
Yeah, it was very clunky. Thank goodness for 5th edition's more streamlined rules. Although there are some things I wish 5th edition had a bit more clarity on, but moving on. So essentially, I got some more resources that my mother and uncle had, and they actually had photocopied pre-written adventures from 2nd edition, and I also received a big stack of that. And I would read through them, try to get some ideas from them, and I even found this old school map, it was like a proper poster. There was a map on both sides. One was an abandoned mansion and the other one was an abandoned castle. And so I tried the abandoned castle. I think their first fight was some type of undead ghoul type monster. It didn't go very well because... So it attacked one of my brothers by surprise. The other one had to be convinced, come and save me, please. And he eventually did. And then... The third one, you know which one I'm talking about, no, without saying any names. He was nah, I'm a wizard. I've only got 4 hit points. I'm not going near that thing. Even though, he had the magic to deal a significant amount of damage to it. Also, spellcasters kind of sucked at early levels in old school D&D. You could cast 2 to 5 spells a day, and that was it when you were level 1.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's just nothing.
Yeah, and you had to spend hours rememorizing them. And it's not like in 5e where you had spell slots and you always had a list of spells prepared. No, in older editions, if you wanted to cast a certain type of spell more than once, you had to memorize it twice. And the slots were essentially spaces in your brain that the spell took up. Uses, essentially. So if you wanted to cast Magic Missile twice, you had to memorize 2 uses of Magic Missile.
Okay.
Very, very complicated old school D&D. Or maybe just for my monkey brain.
No.
But, yeah, so that game didn't really go any far. It wasn't a lot of fun for any of us because we didn't really know what we were doing and the rules were complicated and we were frustrated. And yeah, eventually I gave all of the books to my uncle because I wasn't playing with it anymore. I wasn't using it, and he really wanted it because he wanted to start playing D&D with his friends again. And so I was like, yeah, okay, I guess you can have it. But I kept the dice though, because that was for me personally.
And which dice was that?
This was my mom's dice, the lime ones with the red and blue speckles on them.
Oh.
And then my younger brother, the middle one of the 4 brothers, he lost some of the dice, unfortunately. And then because some of the few dice that I had left, their numbers were starting to fade, I was like, fuck it, and I chucked them. So, because what's you can't really play D&D with half a set, But anyways, moving on to the next phase, my first 5e experience. So it actually started as a LAN party with my former best friend, my current best friend, and a mutual friend of ours. We played stuff like Call of Duty, Warcraft 3, I can't remember if it was golf or golf with friends, but the golf game where the physics are whack and you rage because you can't get the ball in the hole. Good times. But yeah, eventually my former best friend left the LAN party. He had to go home a bit earlier than everybody else. We were all pulling an all-night. The rest of us were pulling an all-nighter. And we were like, so, you ever played D&D before? And we were like, no. Does anybody want to try it? And we were like, okay, sure, let's try playing D&D. And so, yeah, This was after I was like fresh out of high school, like a year or two out of high school. I was still living with my parents, my mother and her boyfriend, and trying to like find a better job other than working in retail. So my current best friend was the DM, and he actually played an elf paladin as well, a DMPC. Yeah, you know,
paladin.
You know his love for elf paladins. Eventually, I convinced him to play another character for my campaign, but that's a different story for a different time. The whole reason why he had this DMPC was because there was only 2 players, me and the mutual friend, and so he wanted us to have a little bit of extra backup. I played a human fighter because I was a basic bitch, and our mutual friend played a tiefling rogue who I lovingly remember as Mr. Potato Thief, because he had a penchant to steal potatoes and wear a sack of old burlap potato sack as clothing.
Okay.
A real him character, you know. My character I called Mr. Pervert because he was labeled as a pervert in many towns and was like he couldn't go back there anymore for obvious reasons. The nickname tells it all. And guess what our DM lovingly named his DMPC? Mr. Bubblebutt.
Oh, yeah.
Because even though he was an elf, he had an ass.
Okay.
So yeah, and so a third of the way through, so essentially the story was, because we were half-assing it, we didn't have any official material, we used the D&D wiki and done D&D Beyond for the rules and stuff, and we just used that as for reference and the rules. And essentially the story was we were recruited by the elf paladin to come to his home city where he's the prince, because there's a possibility of a dragon attack. And so essentially the quests that we went along the way to get there and then get out of the city to the dragon was to help beef our characters up for the eventual dragon fight, which never happened, by the way, because we were too underleveled and the night came to a close. A third of the way through the game and on the way to the DMPC's home city, the DM's brother decided to play with us. And guess what? He also decided to play a human fighter, but distinctly different from mine. Do you know why?
No.
He was called Mr. Odd Eyes because his eyes were vertical instead of horizontal. I don't know what genetic birth defect he was playing there, but it was disgusting. Yeah, and then some of our most memorable fights was fighting a black pudding, which is a type of slime or ooze monster, some ghouls, and I remember about the black pudding fight. The tiefling rogue's strength was so terrible, he couldn't even pull himself free, even with a natural 20. And then 2/3 of the way through the game, the DM said he was getting a bit tired, so would I mind if I was DMing for a bit? And then he took over as a proper player, and so I did. Nothing too interesting really happened. I just kind of had them trek through a grassland and a forest, although when they came to the forest, there was a goblin camp in the forest. And you know what they did instead of fighting the goblins?
No.
They set the whole forest on fire, destroying the ecosystem. And in Avatar The Last Airbender, when the Fire Nation burns down the bamboo forest?
Yeah.
That's essentially what they did to get rid of the goblins. I even had like a secret ogre boss planned that was going to fight them. And when they saw the ogre approaching, they were like, nah, we're just gonna burn down the forest. And then they burned down the forest, and because they actually were very smart about it, they positioned themselves around certain points of the forest. They prevented the goblins from escaping, and the goblins was basically died like scorpions in a ring of fire.
Oh, good lord.
So,
Yeah.
And eventually the campaign, the game ended because we were all tired and wanted to go to bed. And we never really picked off from after that, even though it was quite fun and we all enjoyed it. I guess we all just became very busy. But why don't we move on to your first D&D experience?
Okay.
So when we started playing, I was introducing you to 5th edition because that was what I knew. I had listened to so many Critical Role videos that I pretty much knew most of the rules out of my head. So what character were you playing initially for your first time?
Her name was Vidania. I can't remember her surname. It was so long ago.
Wasn't it Delilah Sunstar or something like that?
What? I was thinking of the Sealy. Sorry.
Different character.
Yeah, Delilah. Her name was Delilah. And I was a High Sun Elf.
Yeah, you were, and you started as a fighter, but you eventually leveled up to an Eldritch Knight, or as I like to call them, Arcane Knights.
Yes. And that was super fun because of all of the spells that I could cast.
That's true.
Yeah.
I really feel like Eldritch Knights are a great way for players to learn how spellcasting works, because it's not like people say Paladins and Rangers are because they are half casters. I think the Eldritch Knight is better because even though it has fewer spells and spell slots, you still get to use them enough to where they feel useful. Like, it feels like a powerful ability that you can use 2 or 3 times, and then they recharge after a while, and they're but you never feel bad about using them.
Yeah.
What was because you were playing by yourself, we were doing a solo player campaign. I had a DMPC as well, and it was actually one of my older characters that I designed to, if I ever played a high level game of D&D. Yes, I created a DMPC that was a high level for a level 1 character.
Check.
Yeah, and he was essentially your adventuring mentor, and he was teaching you how to become an adventurer. There was even a point where your character had a crossover with my brother's characters for their 5th edition game when we were all a little bit older and they wanted to play D&D again or give it a try.
Yeah, and when you and I started living together.
Yeah. So what would you say was like some of your favorite parts of your first game? I remember the were-rat that tried to take over the town by breeding a rat army.
Oh yeah, that was disgusting.
And then when you killed him, you decided to take over his underground lair as your own base. There was the bugbear that invaded your base and tried to take it for himself.
Honestly, I can't remember that.
He was the big hairy guy that.
Yeah, and it feels too long ago.
Probably.
Yeah. And remember, I think I was pregnant at the time that we started playing this. True.
I also didn't really give him too much of a description or flair like a villain. He was more just like a mid-boss. And then the only other thing I really remember other than the crossover was when you went hunting with your mentor and the local hunter to go hunt some dire wolves. It was yeah. There was a lot going on.
Maybe we should move on to the next campaign because I can't remember that one really well.
Well, yeah, I mean,
I loved the town that you created for Delilah. That was cool.
Yeah, it was a
very small village.
But it was a great starting place.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of things around it that you could do. And for some reason, monsters kept coming to this town, so it was a nice hotspot for you to level up.
Unfortunately, though, I think this character died very quickly because, well, not died, but because we kind of stopped the campaign right there.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember.
We played another game.
Yes.
A game that you made up.
Yeah, so what happened was I built a dungeon, and I built some NPCs for when you finish that dungeon. Essentially, your mentor told you, okay, you're like level 5 or something now. You're at an adequate level where you could face certain threats by yourself. So I found this dungeon, go and complete it. And if you do, come back and I will help prepare you to go on your quest to save your people. Because in your backstory, your people were enslaved by giants.
And I think this campaign was also halted because you were going to study.
That's true.
Yeah.
So
we stopped it there.
We stopped the game because I went to go and study a bit and focus on that.
Yeah. That's when we started playing a very fun also game. It wasn't D&D at first. Do you remember?
I think it was D&D.
It was like a choice game.
A choice game.
I still had to roll, but it was like your own world, and it wasn't D&D.
I don't actually remember that, if I have to be honest with you.
Oh, I enjoyed it a lot.
Well, if you can, maybe for another story, you can make some notes and remind me of all of this, because I do not remember it.
But yeah, after that, we wanted to play a game with a bigger group of people.
We wanted to play D&D with some friends.
Yeah, and one of my high school friends was part of it, but she didn't have time. So she kind of phased out.
Yeah.
And then my other friend from university, she joined us, and it started good.
Yes.
But then conflicting times,
yeah.
I think. Yeah. And I remember your friend,
yes.
now our friend together.
Yeah.
He was an ASMR. I remember that very well because I thought it was the coolest thing ever.
Yes. So. Oh, are you talking about my first homebrew game, not including yours? Yeah. So this was a game that was loosely inspired by Magic the Gathering, where there were 5 different nations, each corresponding to a certain color of magic, and also a certain type of belief system and government structure and culture. Your character, the Sealy, which was part of the Green Nation. They're essentially what 5e fairies are now. Yes, I homebrewed the fairy race before Wizards of the Coast even made their fairy race. And then there was obviously the red nation, the blue nation, the white nation, the black nation. The white nation were the celestials, not proper angels, but more like humans with divine power, or humanoids with divine power. They were essentially humanoid angels, and that's what my friend was playing. He was playing a paladin, a celestial paladin, and then your friend was playing a red. What were they? What did I call them? Do you remember what the race was called? But they were essentially a type of tiefling. Like, imagine tieflings, but if they were buff.
Oh.
And she played a rogue. So I remember that. And so essentially the 3 of you were going along because you were asked by your respective nations to investigate an imbalance that was going on this land or continent this land. And so you were traveling through each of the different nations, and there was this group of black nation individuals. I think I can't remember what I called them, but they were basically living undead. They weren't undead in the sense that they were raised corpses, but more like they were born dead, even though they continued to age and grow. And
ghouls, essentially.
Kind of, yeah. Except they didn't have to cannibalize people. I noticed I remember their most prominent ability was black speech, where they could talk to the dead as a language. And then of course you had the merfolk from the blue nation, because they were basically lived near islands and tropical, like, ocean areas. That game, honestly, I can't really remember too much about what happened that game, other than you guys passing through the Red Nation.
And I remember the red dust, and I was so against it because I am... What do you say if you're against something? It's not pro.
Opposed.
But a short version. Is it?
Con?
That doesn't make sense. That doesn't sound right.
You were anti-drugs, essentially.
I was anti-drugs. I was so against it, and I was like, no, my character is better than that. Like,
but to be fair,
I wanted to look cool for my friend, so I just went with it.
To be fair, you didn't actually partake in some red dust.
I didn't. I don't think we did.
I don't think any of you actually used the red dust, the fantasy drug that gives you barbarian rage.
I thought it was going to be important for the plot, but apparently you just... I remember when I asked you about it, you said, oh, you guys were curious about something, so you gave us something.
Yeah. Oh, and remember that for a time there was also an NPC that was traveling with you guys. You had, like, picked him up along the way, and he was traveling with you.
Who was that again?
I don't remember his name, but he was just a guy that was traveling with you and helping you along the way because his goals aligned with yours at the time. I'm going to give you a spoiler because I don't know if we'll ever go back to that game, but he was actually a polymorphed red dragon.
What?
And he was using you guys to get information on the Red Nation and the other nations because he wanted to take over the Red Nation. And the reason why he wanted to travel with you beyond the Red Nation is because he wanted information on potential opponents from the other nations.
Wow.
Yeah, and like the funny part is you guys were so close to like discovering his secret because you were like questioning what his intentions were and his like abilities and integrity.
But we probably just rolled shit, right?
No. It was just unfortunately
we probably just rolled bad.
No, you can swear. I don't give a crap. This is not for children. But yeah, the game just ended before it actually got to that point. So the big confrontation where he revealed that he was actually a dragon just never happened. And the funny part was, he was going to like ask you guys to be his like right-hand underlings, like his right-hand lieutenants. But because you started treating him like shit, he was like, I might spare you if you beg for mercy.
Wow.
Yeah, but unfortunately I never got that chance to play that Ace of Spades. So maybe one day, if we ever return to that campaign, but I don't know if that ever will. I don't wanna... I'd hate to use a character that 1/3 of the players isn't gonna be playing. Well, life happens, people. Yeah, and then eventually we got to where we are today, where we are. We're happy. We're happy. We have a good group of friends that we play D&D with every other Saturday. The first time I ran a proper campaign, it was with them. This was before you actually joined us. You and I were apart for that time. This is when I went to go study, but then COVID happened and that fell through. But yeah, and so we played Lost Mines of Phandelver, and once that campaign was finished, I wanted to start a new campaign, but they liked their characters so much they wanted to keep playing with them. We were on our D&D break. We had finished the campaign and we were on our D&D break. And then when the campaign restarted, your character eventually joined us.
It's actually awesome that you guys finished the campaign. We never have.
No. But I would very much like to one day. Would you ever reconsider starting up an old campaign that you and I have played before? Because we have two other campaigns that we started and haven't finished yet.
I would love for all of our friends, not just yours, to kind of be a part of my world. Wouldn't that be awesome?
You want
Oriental Adventures.
You want to do a crossover with the...
Yes, but like have them finish the game with me.
That is... we can definitely do something like that. I don't know how deep we want to go in, because that campaign also isn't too far from finishing, but we can definitely get more in other player characters in whose goals align with yours.
And we can fight higher levels, because I'm already level what? 11?
I think you were Actually, I think you skipped a level because you the goddess that you decided to serve granted you an extra level as a cleric. So I think
Goddess Inari.
Yeah, the life goddess. You are currently a level 11 thief and a first level cleric for a total of 12 character levels.
I remember, yeah.
Yeah, and
so that would be cool.
That would.
Did that.
Especially because this is probably my biggest homebrew campaign ever. That's
my most favorite ever.
You have done so many crazy, first of all, your character, this is arguably one of your most I don't know if it's your most interesting character, but it's one of your most interesting characters, period. This character is so interesting. She's a kitsune. Because genetics are weird in my homebrew campaign, all human kitsunes are half-breeds, but because they breed true like tieflings, they are all kitsunes.
Yeah, but I was the wild one,
Yeah, your character had an older brother, and you essentially got separated from him and lived as a street urchin, and then eventually which
is, by the way, my main background for every single character in all of the campaigns. Yeah. I never noticed.
You always play some type of some type of orphan or street urchin or wild child. And I've noticed that your past few characters have been very nature themed, whether it's a nature paladin or a druid. This character is so amazing to me because, as part of her backstory, she was a thief, but she was eventually taken in by this noble who trained her to be his personal spy. And as the campaign went on, your character also became a courtesan in the most established brothel or /bordello in the city. So she's a courtesan by day, spy by night, and vigilante somewhere in between. And
she's so fun to play.
The crazy shit that this character has done, from killing an assassin that tried to kill her and devouring the corpse as a fox
was so cool.
to hide the evidence, to starting I think you almost started a gang war at one point between some of the gang members in the slums, and you even fought some ghouls, and these, because this campaign has some loosely anime tropes and themes in it. These are Tokyo ghoul ghouls, not traditional D&D ghouls. So they all had the unique powers that the ghouls have, and you almost caused them to go extinct.
And also, don't forget the 8-year-old homeless boy that I adopted for myself, because my heart broke for the child.
Yeah, he was essentially a half-breed, half Oriental, half foreigner, and because this Oriental campaign is based on a mystical Japan with yokai and spiritualism and all of that, we all know how the Japanese feel about foreigners and half-breeds. There is some disdain towards them. People can say what they will, but the cultural aspect of that is there. And so I think because the child was an abandoned orphan, you felt your heartstrings were tugged and your motherly instincts kicked in.
But I think the most awesome thing about that was you didn't plan for that to happen.
No, it was just
a random encounter.
It was a random encounter, and look what happened. It's the kid is now a part of your adoptive family.
I just love it.
You if you think about it, right? Because you have a boyfriend. Your character has a boyfriend who is actually part of a society of mutants that live in the sewers, a la Morlocks from X-Men. And then you've got your two sidekicks, a literal Ninja Turtle. And,
I love her so much,
and
Brielle.
And the Catgirl Samurai.
Kiagara. Yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, you pretty much have an adoptive family here.
And let's not forget Kaio.
Oh, yes, your informant that you've become much, much closer with. More like a sister at this point.
Yes.
Oh,
it was also, she is based on my university friend that was mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I think this character, I created this NPC before I asked your best friend to create the Ninja Turtle PC that became a NPC.
Okay, you based Kaio on her.
Yeah, and
then she created Brielle, which is my Ninja Turtle best friend.
Yeah.
In the, I almost said the cartoon, in the campaign.
No, we can keep talking about this campaign for hours.
And Kiagara was also based on
another
best friend that was yours but became mine as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
Your current character in our current campaign obviously is probably my favorite. Half wood elf, half green dragon. Essentially a dragonborn that we reflavored as a half dragon.
Althea Nailu.
On a quest to slay her dragon daddy.
Yes.
If she can find out who he is.
And the reason for that is because as soon as I started showing my scales, which was my teenage years, I was basically thrown out like garbage. Again, my street background there, but okay. So now I try to, I'm trying to find him and,
revenge.
Probably not ask him why, because I mean, like, he basically put it in vanished. So
yeah, he basically cut your dad, the person you thought was your dad, and it's so it's actually funny because I'm remembering this now, but your thief character, right? It was actually I remember now. It was going to be a different character because
you're talking about Mayuko now.
Yes.
From Oriental Adventures, the one that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, I remember. She was going to be a completely different character because we were trying to organize a game between your two best friends for an all-girls group of D&D, and your friend who made Brielle was going to play a ranger who had a pet half tiger, half dragon. And your other friend was going to play a werewolf rogue. But because she never could play that character, we eventually moved on to playing Mayuko and Oriental Adventures as one player and DM. And then
additional NPCs.
Yeah, and then the other game with your other friend became a completely new game altogether. With the Tiefling Rogue, the Fairy Druid, and the ASMR Paladin, essentially. With my best friend. The Five Nations game. So, it's just interesting that I remember this now. Because I remember that was a game that we were planning for so long, and then it just didn't come to fruition, and then two different games basically evolved from that game.
Can't remember that at all.
Well, again, yeah, I barely remembered it because it was still in its planning phase. We didn't even get to a session 1.
I know, sorry. I just remember how invested I was from the start in Mayuko and Oriental Adventures.
Well,
and before we completely go on to my lovely dragon character, Althea, I just want to say one last thing about that one. So, Mayuko, my beautiful kitsune character, she... it wasn't just her that was interesting to me from the start. I mean, all the gods and the... all of that. And what made it more fun for me was that I didn't hear everything properly. I remember.
Yeah, you would often mishear something or forget something. and then you would make well, what was it? You named the city like Burger or something.
That's actually what I wanted to say. So I made some notes in a few books that I covered, and I painted it, and one of the covers was
one of the gods whose name translated to the flaming hammerer of the iron anvil, you misheard and translated to the flaming burger of the iron something.
It was so funny. I mean, stuff like that. And sometimes I was actually so tired from my work, but still it was so fun having those sessions. That I remember almost passing out, but I wanted to make my notes, and even my eye was twitching and everything, but I still finished.
Yeah, I think also what was nice about the one-on-one games was the fact that we didn't all have 4 or 5 people didn't have to come together to sit at a table for 3 to 4 hours. We could play 1-hour sessions, but we could
every week.
We could, well, not even every week. Every few days, we could play more than once in a week because it was just you and me. But I think that's where we should leave off. I think we've got many more stories for the future.
Yeah.
So thank you for indulging me and going down this trip through memory lane with me.
It was nice.
Until we meet again and share more stories.
Well, we'll stay together, but
you know what I mean.
Okay.